The Ottawa Senators are on a winning streak and looking to end their long playoff drought. Ross Levitan of Sens Central joins us to talk about that and what it would mean to this organization to get back into the postseason. All that coming up next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face and voice to Locked On NHL listeners and viewers, Ross Levitan of Locked On Senators and Sens Central. And Ross, pretty exciting time for the Ottawa Senators right now. They are winning, and they are winning at the right time.
Yeah, 6 wins in a row, Gil. Appreciate you having me. 7-0-1 in their last 8 games, and that was off of a 5-game losing streak where they fell out of a playoff spot. It feels like ever since their previous 6-game win streak this year, earlier in December, they've been kind of pacing the wild card race. Teams have been within striking distance, and then when that 5-game losing streak happened, 3 divisional losses right before the Four Nations to Tampa twice and Florida. Then out of the Four Nations, you lose another divisional game, wild card race with the Montreal Canadiens, and then the Winnipeg Jets, obviously one of the best teams in the National Hockey League. It was time to take a deep breath, and then they had some winnable games and some games against great teams like Washington, for example. They came back from down 3-0. So I think the best part and the most sustainable part of this win streak for Ottawa, Gil, is that they're doing it in different ways. They've been trailing in games in the third period. They've been down 3-0 to Washington. They get a point out of that one. And then they've had a couple dominant efforts where they never trailed. So they're finding different ways to win. It's a huge sign of maturity for this group. And their top end players are producing, their depth players. Feels like they're really clicking on all cylinders right now.
And they're getting wins against the teams they need to beat, beating some of the teams in the playoff race like Boston, or just beating Toronto in a big rivalry game, beating the Rangers earlier in this streak. What does that mean as far as this team's ability to come through in the clutch?
Yeah, it's showing that they can live up to big moments, and it all starts in goal, right? They went out and got Linus Ullmark for this exact reason, to have that big game goalie who can shut things down. You look at the Detroit game from last Monday. They get outshot 48-24, and they win 2-1. Ullmark was outstanding in that game, and he's had his ups and downs, mostly with injuries this season. He was out for almost 2 months at one point with a bad back, but they were able to kind of stay above water, and now he's playing in lights out right now. He looks so good. Made one mistake in the Leafs game where he fumbled a puck out playing it. It goes in the back of the net, and you can tell this is where you know a team's confident. Jake Sanderson after the game said, hey, I was talking with Thomas Chabot on the bench, and we knew after that mistake that he was going to lock in and not let in anything else. And when you have that confidence, even after a bad mistake from your own teammates, that tells you you're in a really good spot. So yeah, it's the way they're winning, the teams they're winning against, and you can see when you pull up the standings, Ottawa's put a little bit of cushion between them and everyone else in the wild card race.
Talk to me about what the Senators did at the trade deadline and how the new players are impacting the team so far.
Yeah, I think what I liked more than the actual trades at the deadline was GM and president of hockey operations Steve Staios' press conference afterwards, where he acknowledged that trading away a core piece like Josh Norris was hard. It's hard to do. He's a great guy. He was actually the last guest we've had on Locked On Sens. We went up to Ottawa and had a great chat with him. He's an awesome guy and a great hockey player, but for the amount of money that he was making and his consistent injury issues that we hope he can find a way to battle through. But like he's already missed the last game with Buffalo since being traded there. Ottawa needed a guy who they could rely on down the middle. And since acquiring Dylan Cousins, they're 5-0-0. They haven't lost a game. Yesterday was Saturday, I should say, was the first game that Dylan Cousins didn't get a point in. And it just shakes up a comfortable core. And I don't think that the players were feeling like, oh, it doesn't matter. I think this group is really well meaning and really wants to win. That said, you look around and all of a sudden a guy you've gone to battle with for 5 years isn't there anymore. It's like, okay, like, hey, this is a business at the end of the day. And until we start winning consistently, changes are going to happen. Now, I don't think it's that easy as just saying you trade an injured player for a less injured player. With the money they saved, they were then able to go out and add Fabian Zetterlund. Zetterlund's been stuck on the fourth line so far. The line, obviously, they haven't lost since, right? And we know coaches don't like changing a winning lineup, Gil, but I think that you're going to see him down the stretch have moments, like have valuable moments. And I think the Ottawa's fourth line's got the most goals in the league. If you have Zetterland's got 17 and Adam Gaudette's got 16 on the fourth line. So they've added depth. They've added an ability to withstand injuries if they do happen. And I really like what they did, but I even more so like how Steve Staios approached the messaging around the trade deadline.
The old cliche in sports is you're never as bad as you look during a losing streak and never as good as you look during a winning streak. What is your biggest concern about this team as we head into the final stretch drive for the playoffs?
Yeah, I think it would just be, I want to see it consistently against good teams. Like, yes, they've been playing teams around them in the standings, but the game against Toronto was the first playoff team, like in a playoff spot at the time that they met since early February. And I know they obviously didn't play a bunch in February with the Four Nations break, but they'd been playing teams lower in the stand, and that means, I mean, you get the same schedule throughout the year, so they played their harder games a lot earlier on. They've got some big matchups coming up. Like the Montreal Canadiens, not in a playoff spot as of the time of this recording, but they're red hot. They're 7-1-2 in their last 10 games. That's going to be a big game. Then they've got another game coming up against the Colorado Avalanche at home. Like these are the games where, yeah, you've been impressive. You've won games that you should win. Now go out there and win games against teams that are above you in the standings. They've got Florida later this year. They've got Tampa later this year. I want to see them give the top end teams in the Eastern Conference, and I mean the league too, mentioning Colorado. I want to see them give those teams a tough time, because it's one thing to beat teams around you in the standings. It's another to really put yourself into contender mode and be competitive with those best teams in the league.
And those are the teams you're going to face in the playoffs anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping in Ottawa for a Battle of Ontario. Ottawa just swept the season series against Toronto. Ottawa's won 5 games in Toronto's building. Like, I think that would be the perfect welcome back to the playoffs moment for the Ottawa Senators. I'm not one to get ahead of myself. I'm waiting till that X is next to their name in the playoffs. Gil, you know, we've been doing this together since 2019. I've never covered a playoff game. So I'm being very cautious. I'm being very measured. But if you could ask me to handpick an opponent in the first round, give me the Toronto Maple Leafs.
What would ending this playoff drought mean for the Ottawa Senators, for the fans, for the organization? How big would it be?
It would be enormous. I think as much for the organization, who's just had a huge turnaround with new ownership, new management, new coaching, and the players who have been here, like Brady Tkachuk in particular. He comes in, and he's played 500 games now, and he still hasn't played a playoff game. So for him to be able to come in and be in those meaningful games that he thrives so much in at the Four Nations, I think it would mean everything. The fan base is ready. The city's ready. Everything's buzzing around town. Everything's Ottawa Senators, flags in restaurant windows. And this is a team where, I mean, when I grew up from 1997 until 2011, they made the playoffs every single season. You just knew to set your watch. Now, sometimes it would be over in the first round, but sometimes they go to the Stanley Cup final, and you just had that expectation of making playoffs. And I think that's what the ownership and management is trying to get back to. There was a stretch in the 2010s where it was every other year, 2010, 2012, 13, 15, 17. They want to be more consistent than that. And I think that's where a sign of things to come will be, if they can make it this year and then come out of the gate hot again next year.
Ross, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Yeah, you can find us, Brandon Pillars, my co-host. I'm Ross Levitan. You can find us over at Sens Central and Locked On Senators, available everywhere you get podcasts, including on YouTube, where we are 35 subscribers away from 10,000. So help us get to that road to 10K. Gil, always appreciate you, and look forward to another great week on Locked On NHL. The playoff run, like the final stretch, is here, and there's no better time with the weather getting nicer. It's light out later. It's the best time of year to be a hockey fan. So thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks, Ross. Always a pleasure. Today's episode is brought to you by Factor. Eating healthy doesn't have to be complicated. With Factor, you get chef-made, dietitian-approved meals that are ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, so you can fuel your body without the hassle of cooking. Factor meals arrive fresh, never frozen, and with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week, you can customize your menu to fit your goals, whether that's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. I love how Factor keeps you on track with healthy, delicious meals without the time-consuming prep. The Korean beef bowl and creamy Parmesan chicken are some of my favorites. They taste homemade, but take no effort. Factor also offers smoothies, breakfasts, and snacks, so you can always have something nutritious ready to go. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box.